One late August day, about 15 years ago, a train drew up at a quiet country station in the south of England. Out stepped a tall young man carrying a suitcase and some papers tied up in a packet. Now, from the way he looked about him, one would say that he was expecting to be met, and he was, just as obviously, expected. On seeing him, the station master ran forward a step or two, and then, recollecting himself, turned and beckoned to a stout man further down the platform who was scanning the train with some appearance of bewilderment. Mr. Cooper! Mr. Cooper! I think this is a gentleman. And then to the young man who just alighted, Mr. Humphreys, sir. Welcome, sir. Oh, welcome to Wilsthorpe, Mr. Humphreys. There's a cart all ready from the hall for your luggage, and here's Mr. Cooper. The other man had hurried up by now and was raising his hat. Very pleased, Mr. Humphreys, to give echo to the words of Mr. Palmer here, and I should have been the first to render expression to them, but for your face not being familiar to me. But welcome, Mr. Humphreys, and may your residence among us be marked as a red-letter day, sir. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Cooper, said Humphreys, and Mr. Palmer also. I do hope very much that this change of tenancy will not be to the detriment of those with whom I shall be brought into contact. Oh, no, I can assure you, Mr. Humphreys, that a warm welcome awaits you at every quarter. And as to any change of propriety turning out detrimental to the neighbourhood, well, your poor late uncle was really... Your ticket, please. Mr. Palmer, clearing his throat loudly, interrupted Cooper by asking Humphreys for his ticket. And then Mr. Cooper led the new arrival from the little station to his house, which lay close by, where luncheon was awaiting them. Now, the relation in which these two men stood to one another can be quickly explained. Mr. Humphreys had recently inherited, quite unexpectedly, a property from an uncle, Wilsthorpe Hall, although neither property nor uncle had he ever seen. An affable and able fellow, his employment in a government office for the last 5 years had not gone far to fit Mr. Humphreys for the life of country squire. He was studious, rather diffident, and he had few outdoor interests other than golf and a little bit of gardening. But today he had come to Wilsthorpe for the first time to confer with Mr. Cooper, the bailiff, as to those matters which demanded his most immediate attention. So we will now rejoin them, having arrived at Mr. Cooper's comfortable house in town and having been introduced to Mrs. and Miss Cooper. I was just saying to Mr. Humphreys, my dear, how I hope that his residence among us will be marked as a red-letter day. Oh, yes. Yes, indeed, said Mrs. Cooper, and many, many of them. Do you know this part of the country at all, Mr. Humphreys? No, I'm sorry to say that I don't at all, but it seems very pleasant, at least from what I could see coming down in the train. Oh, it is. It really is very, very pleasant. Yes, for the countryside, of course, but for the people too, I've always thought. There's so much going on, you know, although I'm afraid you've come rather late for some of the better garden parties. Really? That's a shame, of course, but to be honest, I think even if I could have been here earlier, I should have been rather cut off from them, wouldn't I, Mrs. Cooper? The garden parties, I mean. Yeah, my poor uncle's recent death and so forth. Oh, Mr. Humphreys. Oh, what a dreadful thing for me to have said. Of course. Oh, you must forgive me, Mr. Humphreys. Oh, no, not at all, Mrs. Cooper. Please, don't worry. No, I mean, I can't honestly say that my uncle's death was any great grief to me, because I've never actually met him, you see. No, all I meant was that I suppose I shouldn't be expected to take part in any festivities, just for a while, you know. Well, it's very kind of you to take it that way. But fancy, you never met poor old Mr. Wilson? Never, not once. No, never even received a letter from him. But now, I mean, you have something to forgive me for, Mrs. Cooper, because I don't think I ever thanked you properly for all the trouble you've taken to find staff at the hall. Oh, no, that was nothing, Mr. Humphreys. But I think they'll give satisfaction. Yes, we've known the Caltons, the butler and housekeeper, for a number of years. Very respectable couple. And my husband, I'm sure, will answer for the men in the stables and the gardens. Oh, yes, said Mr. Cooper. Yes, indeed, yes. The head gardener, Mr. Clutterham, he's the only one who stayed on from Mr. Wilson's time, but he's gathered some good lads about him. Splendid. And thank you both very much for all the trouble that you've gone to. Now, Mr. Cooper, if you could spare some time this afternoon to go over the house and the grounds with me, my time is yours, Mr. Humphreys, up to any hour that you please. Well, up until dinner time, Father, interrupted Miss Cooper. Don't forget we're going over to the Barretts tonight. And do make sure that you've got all the keys so you can show Mr. Humphrey all around the wonderful garden. Oh, are you a great gardener, Miss Cooper? Said Humphreys. I wish you'd tell me everything that I am to expect at the Hall. Well, no, I wouldn't say a great gardener, Mr. Humphreys, but I'm fond of flowers. But the whole garden, though, well, it has great potential, I've always thought. Now, it's rather old-fashioned, but it's nice in its way. You know, there's some fine old shrubs and a temple and the maze, of course. A maze? Really? Aha! Have you ever explored it? Oh, no. I often wanted to, but your uncle always kept it locked up. He wouldn't even let Lady Wardrop in. Now, she really is a great gardener. That's why I told Father to make sure that he had all the keys. I see. Well, I must look into this maze, and perhaps, Miss Cooper, I can show you over it when I've opened it up. Oh, Mr. Humphreys, thank you. Yes, I'd be fascinated to go inside. Yeah, I think the garden keys must be up at the house, said Mr. Cooper, who'd been examining a large bunch during that dialogue. There's a number in the library, I seem to remember. Now then, Mr. Humphreys, if you're ready, we might set forth. Well, as they made their way to the Hall, the topic of Mr. Humphrey's late uncle surfaced again, and it was not long before Mr. Cooper was embarked upon a disquisition. It is singular to think, Mr. Humphreys, as my wife was saying just now, that you should never have met your old uncle. And yet, well, you won't misunderstand me, I hope, when I say that I think, well, there'd have been but little congeniality betwixt yourself and him. I mean, not that I have a word to say in deprecation. Oh, no. But your uncle was what I would call a complete and thorough valetudinarian. That's what he was, sir. He was a complete valetudinarian. Upright he was, open as the day, liberal in all his dealings. He had the heart to feel and the hand to accommodate. But there was a stumbling block of his health, Mr. Humphreys, or as one might properly more phrase it, his want of health. Yes. Poor man. Did he suffer from any particular disorder before his last illness, Mr. Cooper? Or was it simply old age? Just that, Mr. Humphreys. Yeah, just that. The flash flickering slowly away in the pan. You know, the golden bowl gradually ceasing to vibrate. But as to your other question, I think I should return a negative answer. General absence of vitality, yes. Special complaint, no. Unless you reckon a nasty cough that he had with him. But here we are, sir. The house. A handsome mansion, don't you think? Well, yeah. I mean, it deserved the epithet on the whole, perhaps. But it's very oddly proportioned. Tall, red brick structure with a basement and an imposing flight of steps leading up to the front door. I mean, it seemed, owing to its height, to require wings, but there were none. I mean, it gave the impression of being a townhouse set down in the country. Humphreys guessed its date as around 1770. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Calton, the couple who'd been engaged as butler and housekeeper, were waiting inside the front door as their new master entered, and Humphreys formed a favourable impression in the brief talk that he had with them. And then he and Cooper began a tour of the house. The ground floor rooms were pleasingly light and spacious, especially the library, which is as large as the dining room and had 3 tall windows facing east. There were many pleasant and a few actually really quite interesting old pictures. The furniture was all antique, and hardly any of the books were later than the 70s. The bedroom prepared for Humphreys was immediately above it and also large. But you see, after hearing of the few changes that his uncle had made to the house, and after having contemplated a portrait of him which adorned the drawing room, Humphreys was rather inclined to agree with Cooper that, in all probability, there would have been little to attract him in his predecessor. And this made him rather sad that he couldn't properly mourn this old stranger who'd contributed so much to his well-being. Because as he was shown around Wilsthorpe, he increasingly felt that the house, and especially the library, was a place in which he could be really happy. The men next addressed themselves to the garden, and soon it was clear that Miss Cooper had been right about its having some points of real interest. Mr. Cooper, that white building up there at the end of the grass ride, what's that? Oh, yes, sir, the Temple of Friendship, Mr. Humphreys. Yeah, the one as my daughter mentioned to you earlier. Constructed of marble brought out of Italy for the purpose by your late uncle's grandfather. Would it interest you to take a turn there? You get a fine prospect of the park. Well, the general lines of the building were those of the Sibyl's Temple at Tivoli, reduced, of course, and helped out by a dome. Some ancient sepulchral reliefs had been built into the wall, and about it all there was a pleasant flavour of the grand tour. Inside, a handsome ceiling, but very little furniture. Most of the floor was occupied by a pile of thick, circular blocks of stone, each of which had a single letter deeply cut into its upper surface. Well, what are these? Asked Mr. Humphreys. Yes. Well, yeah, all things we're told have their purpose, don't they, Mr. Humphreys? And I suppose that these blocks had theirs too once, but what that purpose is or was, I am quite unable to tell you, sir. All I know of them is that they were removed by your late uncle from the maze, and that they were once the maze. Of course, I'd quite forgotten about the maze. Well, where is the maze? Cooper drew him to the door of the temple. Guide your eye by my stick, sir, and you'll catch the archway over the entrance, just at the end of the walk, answering to the one that leads up here. Did you think of going over there now? In that case, I've got to go and fetch the key from the house. But if you make your way over, I'll rejoin you there shortly. And so Mr. Humphreys made his way down past the garden front of the house and up the turfy approach to the archway, which Mr. Cooper had pointed out. Now, he was rather surprised when he got there that the maze was entirely surrounded by a high brick wall, and that the archway was closed by a padlocked gate. There was a motto cut over it: Secretum meum mihi et filiis domus mei. My secret is for me and the sons of my house. Well, if that's a quotation from anything, I've never come across it, said Humphreys. And then, after a few minutes, as Mr. Cooper had still not come, he considered the possibility of scaling the wall. But no. Perhaps if he'd been wearing an older suit. Or could perhaps the padlock be forced? Doubtful. And yet, as he gave a final irritated kick at the gate, something gave way and the lock fell at his feet. He pushed the gate open and stepped within the wall. It was a yew maze of circular form. The hedges had gone wildly and upward, so the walks were next to impassable, and it was only by ignoring scratches, nettle stings, and wet that Humphreys could force his way along them. But at least this would make it easier for him to find his way out again, because, as he reflected, he was leaving behind him a very visible track. Now, so far as he could remember, he'd never actually been in a maze before. And nor did it seem to him now that he'd missed much, because the dankness and darkness were anything but cheerful. Still, it didn't seem to be a very intricate specimen of its kind, because here he was already at the heart of it, without having taken much thought as to what path he was following at all. And hey, look at this. There's something in the middle of it. Now, his first impression was that the central ornament was a sundial. But when he'd cleared away some of the brambles that obscured it, he saw that it was, in fact, a much less ordinary decoration. A stone column, about 4 feet high, and on top, a metal globe, copper, to judge by the green patina, engraved, and finely engraved too, with figures in outline and letters. Now, a brief glance at these figures suggested to Humphreys that this was one of those mysterious and, to him, frankly baffling things called celestial globes. But it was too dark to examine it at all closely. And besides, he now heard Mr. Cooper coming through the undergrowth. Or was it Cooper? Mr. Cooper, is that you? Yes, it was Cooper. And soon that good fellow emerged into the central circle, full of apologies for his delay. He'd not been able, after all, it seems, to find the key in the house. Well, I see, sir, as you've penetrated into the heart of the mystery unaided. I think it must be 40 years since any human foot has trod these precincts. A distant clock now struck 4, and suddenly feeling the cold, Humphrey suggested that it was time to get back to the house for a cup of tea and to release Mr. Cooper for his evening engagement. And so they left the maze, experiencing well nigh the same ease in retracing their path as they'd had coming in. Have you any idea, Humphrey said as they went up to the house, why my uncle kept that place locked up? No, sir. No, none at all. No, I mean, when I first started here, this was some 18 years back, the maze was in the same self-condition as you see it in today, locked up and overgrown. And the only occasion on which the question of entering it ever arose was when Lady Wardrop wrote, applying for admission. Now, that was the lady who my daughter mentioned to you earlier. Your uncle, he showed me a letter. Reply to this, will you, Cooper? He said. Give Lady Wardrop my compliments and tell her that if ever that portion of the grounds is taken in hand, I shall be happy to give her the first opportunity of viewing it. But that it has been shut up for now for a number of years, and I shall be glad to hear if she will not press the matter any further. And that, Mr. Humphreys, that was your uncle's last word on the subject. And I don't think I can add anything to that, except perhaps that, well, so far as I could judge, he had a dislike to the memory of his grandfather, who, as I said, was the one who laid out that maze in the first place, and who'd built the temple, of course. Yeah. He was a man, you see, of peculiar tenets. He'd be your great-grandfather, wouldn't he, sir? Yeah. Great traveller, he was. You'll have the opportunity this Sunday of seeing the tablet to him in our little parish church. Put up, it was sometime after his death. Huh, said Humphreys. I'm rather surprised that a man with such a passion for building didn't design a mausoleum for himself. Well, no, I can see why you say that, Mr. Humphreys. Yeah. And come to think of it, I'm not at all sure where his final resting place really is. I mean, that he lays in the vault, I'm pretty sure, is not the case. It's funny, really. But at this point, they entered the house, and Mr. Cooper's speculations were interrupted. Tea was laid in the library, where Cooper took his leave, but not before Mr. Humphreys had extracted from him a promise to bring his wife and daughter round the following afternoon to see the maze. Well, we'd probably better clear it out a bit beforehand, though, hadn't we? Could you give instructions to have that done early tomorrow morning? Certainly, sir. Yes, I shall leave word as I pass the lodge. And I'll tell them, perhaps, that they'd better have some sticks or tape to mark out their way as they go in. Excellent idea. Yes. Please do that. And I expect Mr. and Mrs. and Miss Cooper later in the afternoon. And yourself, about 10:30 in the morning? It'll be a pleasure, sir. I'm sure, to both to them and myself. Good night, sir. Good night. Well, Humphreys dined at 8, and then repaired to the library where, candle in hand and pipe in mouth, he began to take stock of the books. Now, as he pursued his round, the sense came upon him, as I think it does often upon most of us in similar places, of the extreme unreadableness of a great portion of the collection. I mean, editions of the classics and church fathers are all very well, I suppose, he said to himself, but whoever's going to read, what's this? Tostatus Abulensis, or Pineda. Oh, Pineda on Job, or whatever's this. He'd picked out a small quarto from the shelf, and now he retired with this to a chair. Now, his condemnation of this volume, it should be said, rested wholly on external grounds, because it might have contained anything. But undeniably, the outside was blank and forbidding. The lettered label had fallen off, and the blank, scuffed binding was loose. On opening it, it proved, in fact, to be a collection of sermons and meditations, and seemed to belong to the latter end of the 17th century. Humphreys idly turned some pages until his eye was caught by a marginal note, a parable of this unhappy condition, and he decided to see what aptitude the author might have for imaginative composition. I have heard or read, began the passage, whether in the way of parable or true relation, I leave my reader to judge, of a man who, like Theseus in the Attic tale, should adventure himself into a labyrinth or maze, and such an one indeed as was not laid out in the fashion of a topiary artist of this age, but of a wide compass, in which, moreover, such unknown pitfalls and snares, nay, such ill-omened inhabitants, were commonly thought to lurk as could only be encountered at the hazard of one's very life. Now, you may be sure that in such a case the dissuasions of friends were not wanting. Consider of such a one, says a brother, how he went the way you wot of, and was never seen again. Or of such another, says the mother, that adventured himself but a little way in, and from that day forth is so troubled in his wits that he cannot tell what he saw, nor hath passed one good night. And have you never heard, cried a neighbour, of what faces have been seen to look out over the palisades or betwixt the bars of the gate? But this would not do. The man was set upon his purpose, for it was the common fireside talk of that country that at the heart and centre of this labyrinth there was a jewel of such price and rarity that would enrich the finder thereof for his life, and this should be by his right that he could persever to come at it. What then? Quid multa? The adventurer passed the gates, and for a whole day's space his friends without have no news of him, except, it might be, by some indistinct cries heard far off in the night, such as made them turn in their beds and sweat for fear, not doubting but that their son and brother had put one more to the catalogue of those unfortunates that had suffered shipwreck on that voyage. So the next day they went with weeping tears to the clerk of the parish to order the bell to be tolled, and their way took them hard by the gate of the labyrinth, which they would have hastened by from the horror that they had of it, but that they caught sight of a sudden of a man's body lying in the roadway, and going up to it, found it to be him whom they reckoned as lost, and not dead, although he were in a swoon most like death. Then they, who had gone forth as mourners, came back rejoicing, and set to by all means to revive the prodigal, who, being come to himself, and hearing of their errand of that morning, says, "You may as well finish what you were about. For though I have brought back the jewel," which he showed them, and 'twas indeed a rare piece, "I have brought back with it that which will leave me neither rest at night nor pleasure by day." Whereupon they were instant with him to learn his meaning, and where his company should be, that went so sore against his stomach. Oh, he said, 'tis here in my breast. I cannot flee from it, do what I may. So it needed no wizard to help them guess that it was the recollection of what he had seen that troubled him so wonderfully, but they could get no more of him from a long time, by fits and starts. However, at long and at last, they gathered somewhat of this kind, that at first, while the sun was bright, he went merrily on, and without any difficulty reached the heart of the labyrinth and got the jewel, and so set out on his way back rejoicing. But as the night fell, he began to be sensible of some creature keeping pace with him, and, as he thought, peering and looking upon him from the next alley besides his, and that when he should stop, this companion should stop also. And indeed, as the darkness increased, it seemed to him that there was more than one, and it might be even a whole band of such followers. At least so he judged by the rustling and cracking that kept among the thickets. Besides that, there was sometimes a sound of whispering, which seemed to import a conference among them. But in regard of who they were, or what form they were of, he would not be persuaded to say what he thought. Upon his hearers asking him what the cries were which they heard in the night, he gave them this account, that about midnight he heard his name called from a long way off, and he would have been sworn it was his brother that so called him. So he hallooed at the pitch of his voice, and he supposed then that the echo or the noise of his shouting disguised for the moment any lesser sound, because when there fell a stillness again, he distinguished a trampling, not loud, of running feet coming very close behind him, wherewith he was so daunted that he himself set off at a run that he continued until the dawn broke. Sometimes, when his breath failed him, he would cast himself flat on his face and hope that his pursuers might overrun him in the darkness. But at such a time, they would regularly make a pause themselves, and he could hear them pant and snuff as it had been a hound at fault. And this wrought in him so extreme a horror of mind that he would be forced to betake himself again to turning and doubling, if by any means he might throw them off the scent. So that in fine, he said, a more dreadful night was never spent by mortal than that he had endured in the labyrinth. And not that jewel which he had in his wallet, nor the richest that was ever bought out of the Indies, could be a sufficient recompense to him for the pains that he'd suffered. I will spare to set down the further recital of the man's troubles, inasmuch as I'm confident that my reader's intelligence will hit the parallel I desire to draw. For is not this jewel a just emblem of the satisfaction which a man may bring back with him from a course of this world's pleasures? And will not the labyrinth serve as an image of the world itself, wherein such a treasure, if we may believe the common voice, is stored up? And at this point it occurred to Mr. Humphreys that a game of patience might be an agreeable change. So he put the book back in its former place, wondering as he did so whether his uncle had ever stumbled across that same passage, and if so, whether it had worked in his fancy so much as to make him dislike the idea of a maze and determine to shut up the one in the garden. And not long afterwards, he went to bed. Well, the next day, at luncheon, after a morning's hard work, Mr. Cooper pointed out to Mr. Humphreys an oil portrait in the dining room depicting old Mr. Wilson, his uncle's grandfather, the builder of the temple and the maze. And Mr. Humphreys examined this with considerable interest. I mean, it was clearly the work of an Italian artist, had apparently been painted when Wilson was visiting Rome as a young man. There was a view of the Colosseum in the background. A pale, thin face and dark eyes were the characteristic features of the portrait. In his hand was a partially unfolded roll of paper on which was visible the plan of a circular building, the Temple of Friendship, no doubt, and also part of the labyrinth. Humphreys got up onto a chair to examine this more closely, but it wasn't painted clearly enough to be worth copying. It did, however, suggest to him that he really ought to make his own plan of the maze and hang it on the wall for the use of future visitors. And this determination was strengthened that same afternoon because when Mrs. and Miss Cooper arrived, eager to be induced into the maze, he found that he was wholly unable to lead them to the centre. The gardeners, who'd already removed the guide marks that they'd been using, were likewise at a loss. And even old Mr. Clutterham, the head gardener, when summoned to assist, was as helpless as the rest of them. Well, you see, the point is, Mr. Wilson, Humphreys. Look, I'm Mr. Humphreys. Oh, beg your pardon, Mr. Humphreys, of course. Yeah, sorry. The point is, Mr. Humphreys, that these mazes is purposely constructed with a view to mislead, you see. But if you follow me, I think I can probably put you right. I'll just put my hat down here as a starting point. Well, Clutterham stumped off, and after 5 minutes, he brought the party right back to his hat. What? Well, that is a funny thing. No, I made sure that I left that against a bramble bush. And you can see for yourself, so there ain't no bramble bush around here. I think, if you'll allow me, Mr. Humphreys, I'll just call one of the men to mark the place. All right? Now, William Crack! Well, William Crack eventually arrived in answer to even more shouts, although he too had some difficulty in making his way to the party. First, he was heard in an inside alley, and then almost at the same moment in an outer one. But he reached them at last and was stationed by the hat. And yet, in spite of even this strategy, the party spent 3/4 of an hour in quite fruitless wanderings, and Humphreys was obliged at last, seeing how tired Miss Cooper was becoming, to suggest a retreat to tea. Well, Miss Cooper, he said, at least you've seen something of the maze. And I promise you that the first thing I'll do shall be to make a proper plan of it and get the route marked out so we can make it to the centre properly next time. Oh, yeah, I think that's what's wanted, sir, said Clutterham. Someone to draw out a plan. Or perhaps, sir, what I could do, if you'll permit me, is make a shortcut to the middle. I take down a couple of trees in each hedge so as you can get a clear view right through. I mean, of course, that would do away with the maze, but I don't know you'd approve of that. No, Mr. Clutterham, thank you, but I think I'll make my plan first. Later on, if we really find it necessary, I'll think about what you suggest. Now, Humphreys was embarrassed and annoyed at the fiasco of that afternoon, and he could not be satisfied without making another attempt that evening to reach the centre of the maze. And his irritation was increased because he found it without a single false step. He had thoughts of beginning his plan at once, but no, the light was fading, and he felt that by the time he'd got the necessary materials together, work would be impossible. Early the next morning, however, armed with drawing board, pencils and paper, he went to the middle of the maze, again without any hesitation, and he set out his materials. He was, however, delayed in making a start. The brambles and weeds that had previously obscured the column and the globe had all by now been cleared away, and it was for the first time possible to see clearly what these were like. Now, the column itself was quite featureless, but not so the globe. I mean, I've already said that it was finely engraved with figures and inscriptions, and that on first glance, Humphreys had taken it for a celestial globe. But he soon found that it really did not actually closely answer to his recollection of such things. I mean, one feature seemed familiar, a winged serpent, Draco encircled it about the place which on a terrestrial globe is occupied by the equator. A good part of the upper hemisphere was covered by the outspread wings of a gigantic figure whose head was concealed by a ring at the summit of the whole. And around the place of the head, the words Princeps Tenebrarum could be deciphered. The Prince of Darkness. Oh, golly. In the lower hemisphere, there was a space hatched all over with cross lines and marked as Umbra Mortis, the shadow of death. And near this was a range of mountains and a valley with flames rising up from it, which was lettered Vallis Filiorum Hinnom, the valley of the sons of Gehenna. Oh, crumbs. Above and below Draco were outlined various other figures, like pictures of the constellations, but not quite the same. So a nude man with a raised club was described not as Hercules, but as Cain. Another, plunged up to his middle in earth and stretching out despairing arms, was Corre, rather than Ophiuchus. And a third, hung by his hair to a snaky tree, was Absalom. Now, near this last, a man in long robes and a high cap, standing in a circle and addressing two shaggy demons, was described as Hostanes Magus. Golly. I mean, the scheme of the whole seemed to be an assemblage of the patriarchs of evil. And Humphreys thought it was a very unusual exhibition of his great-grandfather's taste. But, he reflected, he probably picked it up in Italy and never took the trouble to examine it closely himself. Certainly, if he'd set any store by it, he'd never let it be exposed to the weather like this. He tapped the metal, which seemed hollow and not very thick. And then, turning from it, he addressed himself to making his plan. After half an hour's work, he found that it was quite impossible to get on without using a clue. So he procured a roll of twine from Clutterham and laid it out along the alleys from the entrance to the centre, tying the end to the ring at the top of the globe. Now, this helped him set down a rough plan before luncheon, and in the afternoon, he was able to draw it more neatly. Towards tea time, Mr. Cooper joined him and was very much interested in the progress. This thing here, Mr. Humphreys. Woo! Boo! Wow! Hey! He'd laid his hand on the globe, but now he drew it away hastily. Woo! God! That don't half hold the heat, don't it? I suppose, it's copper, I suppose, isn't it? It would be an insulator or conductor, something like that. Well, said Humphreys, the sun has been pretty strong, but he evaded the scientific question. But I didn't notice the globe had got particularly hot myself. I mean, it seems all right to me now. Well, ain't that odd? Oh, God, now I can hardly bear to put my hand on it. I mean, the difference of temperament between us, I suppose, Mr. Humphreys. I dare say that you're a chilly subject, and I'm not. But here, let me help you with that string. No, it's all right. I've got the string, thank you. But if you could collect the pencils and other things that are lying about here, that would be very helpful. Thank you. And now, I think if we've got everything, we might get back to the house. Well, they left the maze, Humphreys rolling up the clue as they went. Annoyingly, however, it turned out that, whether by Mr. Cooper's fault or not, everything had not been picked up from the centre of the maze, because the carefully drawn plan itself had been forgotten. Bother. The night grew rainy, and it was recovered the next morning, a soggy and illegible mess. All right, well, there was nothing for it but to start all over again. So the clue was put back in place and a further fresh start made. B.C. Humphreys hadn't made any progress before an interruption came in the shape of Calton with a telegram. Oh, God, what is it now? Oh, his late chief in London wanted to consult him on something that he'd left unfinished. I mean, only a brief interview was wanted, apparently, but the summons was urgent. I mean, this was annoying, but Humphreys couldn't, in good conscience, refuse the request. There was a train in half an hour, and he could, with luck, be back by 5 o'clock. He gave the unfinished plan to Calton to take to the house, but he left the clue in its place. Well, all the business in London went very smoothly, and Humphreys was back in plenty of time for dinner, after which he spent a rather exciting evening in the library because he lighted upon a cupboard where some of the rarer books were stored. When, therefore, he went to bed, he was tired and content and glad to find that the servants had remembered to leave his curtains undrawn and his windows open. He put down his light and went to the window, which commanded a view of the garden and the park. Brilliant moonlit night. In a few weeks' time, the winds of autumn would break up all this calm. But for now, the distant woods were in a deep stillness. The slopes of the lawns shone with dew. Even the colours of some of the flowers could be guessed at. The light of the moon just caught the cornice of the temple and the curve of its leaden dome, and Humphreys owned that, so seen, these conceits of a past age did indeed have a real beauty and charm. In short, the light, the perfume of the woods, the absolute quiet, called up such kind old associations in his mind that he ruminated for a long time. And as he turned from the window, he felt he'd never seen anything more complete of its sort. The only feature that struck him as incongruous was a small Irish yew, which stood out thin and black, like an outpost of the shrubbery, or through which the maze was approached. That, he thought, might as well be removed. I mean, it was a wonder that anyone could have thought it would ever work in a position like that in the first place. Next morning, however, in the press of answering letters, the Irish yew was forgotten. Now, one of the letters that he answered was from Lady Wardrop, the great gardener, whom Miss Cooper had mentioned, and it renewed the application which she'd once addressed to Humphrey's uncle to view the maze. She was, Lady Wardrop explained, about to publish a book of mazes, and she earnestly desired to include a plan of Wilsthorpe's. It would be a great kindness if Mr. Humphreys could let her see it soon, because soon she would have to go abroad for the winter months. Now, her house at Bentley was not far distant, so Humphreys was able to send a note suggesting the very next day, and the messenger brought back a most grateful answer to the effect that would suit Lady Wardrop admirably. The only other event that day was that the plan of the maze was finally finished. The night was again fair and calm, and Humphreys lingered almost as long as before at his window. The Irish yew came to his mind again as he was on the point of drawing his curtains, but either he'd been misled by a shadow the night before, or else the shrub was really not so intrusive as he'd fancied. Anyway, he saw no good reason for interfering with it now. What he would do, though, was get rid of a clump of dark growth which had usurped a place against the house wall and was threatening to obscure one of the lower ranges of windows. Dank and unhealthy it looked, little as he could see of it, and it didn't seem as it could possibly be worth keeping. Next day, Lady Wardrop arrived for luncheon. She was a stout old lady, full of talk, and was particularly inclined to make herself agreeable to Mr. Humphreys, who had gratified her very much by his ready granting of her request to view the maze. They made a thorough exploration of the grounds together, and Lady Wardrop's opinion of her host rose higher still when she discovered that he really did know something of gardening. She was particularly delighted with the temple. Gosh, yes. Now, do you know, Mr. Humphreys, I think your bailiff might be right about these lettered blocks of stone. One of my mazes, and I'm sorry to say that the stupid people have destroyed it now, but that also had a track marked out in a similar way. That they were tiles there, but they were lettered like yours. And the letters, when taken in the right order, formed an inscription. Now, I forget what it said exactly, something about Theseus and Ariadne, I think. But I've got a copy of it, as well as the plan of the maze that it was in. But I mean, how can people do such a thing? Mr. Humphreys, I shall never forgive you if you injure your maze. You know they're becoming quite uncommon. Almost every year I hear one of them being grubbed up. But can we get to it now? Can we? Or if you're too busy, I know my way there, and I'm not at all afraid of getting lost. No, I know far too much about mazes for that. But if you can manage to come with me, of course, that would be even nicer. Now, after this confident prelude, justice would seem to require that Lady Wardrop should have been hopelessly muddled by the Wilsthorpe maze. But no, not a bit of it. And yes, well, it's to be doubted whether she got all the enjoyment from her new specimen that she had expected. I mean, she was interested, keenly interested, to be sure. She pointed out to Humphreys a series of little depressions in the ground, which she thought marked the places of the lettered blocks, and the globe completely absorbed her. It was unique in her experience, and she pored over it for a long time. Yeah, I'd very much like to take a rubbing of this, if one can be made, she said. Oh, no, I confess I don't think I'd like to take any liberties here. I rather have the feeling they might be resented. Well, what do you mean? Said Humphreys. Really? Well, I mean, don't you feel? Well, I mean, haven't you felt ever since you came in here that, well, I don't, a watch is being kept of us, and that if we overstep the mark in any way, there'd be a pounce. Really? Oh, gosh, I do. I don't care how soon we're back outside the gate. After all, she said, when they were on their way back to the house, it may have only been the airlessness and dull heat of the place, but I'll tell you what, Mr. Humphreys, I will take back one thing that I said earlier. I'm not sure that I shan't forgive you, after all, if I find that next spring you've grubbed your maze up. Huh. Well, I mean, whether that's done or not, Lady Wardrop, you shall have the plan of it. I've made one already, and no later than tonight, I can trace you a copy of it. Oh, that'd be perfect, Mr. Humphreys. A pencil tracing would be absolutely fine, with the indication of the scale, perhaps. Yes. Now, I can easily have that brought into line then with the rest of my plans. You'll have it tomorrow, Lady Wardrop. I only wish that you could help me with my block puzzle. What, the stones in the summer house? Yeah, that is a puzzle, isn't it? They're not in any kind of order. No. I mean, the men who put them down must have had some guidance, though, mustn't they? There's nothing among your uncle's things. Not that I've found. No. Oh, I tell you, you can advise me on one other thing, Lady Wardrop, since you're here. That bush thing over there under the library window. You'd have a way with that, wouldn't you? What? Oh, that? No. I don't see why not. I don't see why. I can't see it very well from here, but it doesn't seem too unsightly. No, perhaps you're right. I was looking out of my window just above it last night, and I thought, I just kept up too much room. Doesn't seem to from here, though. I quite agree. Oh, well, I'll leave it for now. Tea was next, after which Lady Wardrop drove off. But halfway down the drive, she stopped her car and beckoned to Humphreys, who was still on the front door steps. He ran to glean her parting words, which were these. Just occurs to me, Mr. Humphreys, might be worth looking on the underside of those stones. They must have been numbered, mustn't they? Yeah. Anyway, goodbye again, and thank you so much for showing me everything. Well, the main occupation of that evening, at any rate, was settled. That was the tracing of the plan for Lady Wardrop. and the careful collation of it took the original 2 hours at least. Accordingly, soon after 9 o'clock, Humphreys had his materials put in the library and began. It was a stuffy evening now. Windows had to stand open, and he had more than one unnerving encounter with a bat. These episodes made him keep the tail of his eye on the window, and once or twice there was a question of whether not a bat, but something more considerable had a mind to join him. But well, there was work to be done, and soon the tracing of the plan was completed. All that remained then was to compare it with the original to see whether any paths had been wrongly closed or left open. Now, with one finger on each paper, Humphreys traced out the course that must be followed from the entrance. There were one or two slight mistakes, but these were easily corrected. Oh, but now, near the centre, there was a bad confusion, probably due to the entry of the second or third bat. Before correcting the copy, he followed out carefully the last turnings of the path on the original. Now those at least were right and led without a hitch to the middle. Oh, but dearie me, here was a feature in the original which certainly must not be repeated in the copy. An ugly black spot, about the size of a shilling, ink no doubt. No, it resembled a hole. What? How could a hole be there? Humphreys strained at it with tired eyes. I mean, the work of the tracing had been very laborious, and he was drowsy and oppressed. But surely this was a very odd hole. It seemed to go not only through the paper, but through the table on which it lay. Yes, and through the floor below it. Down, and still down, into infinite depths. Humphreys craned over it, utterly bewildered, just as when you were a child you might have pored over a square inch of counterpane until it became a landscape with wooded hills and churches and houses, and you lost all thought of the true size of yourself and it. So this hole seemed to Humphreys for the moment the only thing in the world. And for some reason it was hateful to him from the first. But he gazed at it for some minutes before any feeling of anxiety came over him. But then it did. Stronger and stronger. A horror that something might emerge from the hole. And an agonizing conviction that terror was on its way, a sight from which he would not be able to escape. Oh, no. No! But yes, now, far, far down there was a movement. And the movement was upwards, towards the surface, towards Humphreys. Nearer and nearer it came, of blackish grey colour, with dark patches, the shape of a face, a human face, a burned human face, and with the odious writhings of a wasp creeping out of a rotten apple, there clambered forth the appearance of a form waving black arms prepared to clasp the head that was bending over them. With a convulsion of despair, Humphreys threw himself back, struck his head against the hanging lamp, and fell limp. There was a concussion of the brain. shock to the system and a long confinement to bed. And the doctor was badly puzzled, not by the symptoms so much as by a request which Humphreys made as soon as he was able to say anything. I wish, Doctor, that you would open the ball in the maze. Well, hardly room enough for dancing there, I'd have thought, said the doctor, at which Humphreys grumbled and turned over to sleep once more. And the doctor intimated to the nurses that the patient was not yet out of the wood. When he was better able to express himself, Humphreys made his meaning clear and received a promise that the thing should be done at once. Now, so anxious was he to learn the result that the doctor, who seemed a little pensive that morning, saw that more harm than good would be done by saving up his report. Well, he said, the ball in the maze is done for, I'm afraid. The metal must have been terribly corroded because it fell to bits with the first blow of the chisel. And, said Mr. Humphreys impatiently, yeah, you want to know what we found inside it, I suppose. Yeah, well, it was half full of ashes. Ashes? Yeah. I haven't examined them properly yet. I mean, there's hardly been time. But Mr. Cooper has made up his mind that it is a case of cremation. Now, please don't excite yourself, Mr. Humphreys, but I think that he's probably right. Well, the maze is gone. And Lady Wardrop has forgiven Mr. Humphreys. In fact, I think that he married her niece. She was right, too, in her conjecture about the stones in the temple. There had been a numeral painted on the bottom of each of them. Some had rubbed off, but enough remained to enable Humphreys to reconstruct the following inscription: Penetrans ad interiora mortis. Penetrating to the inner places of death. Now, grateful as Humphreys was to the memory of his uncle, he couldn't quite forgive him for having burned the journals and letters of that older James Wilson who had gifted Wilsthorpe with the maze and the temple. As to the circumstances of that ancestor's death and burial, no tradition survived, but his will, which was almost the only record of him accessible, assigned an unusually generous legacy to a servant who bore an Italian name. And one of the oddest things in all this strange business is that the book that contained the parable has entirely disappeared. You know, Mr. Humphreys has never been able to find it again since he copied out the passage and sent it to Lady Wardrop.